June 1924. The train lurched to a stop at Billings Station, Montana Territory, and William Hartwell Jr. stepped onto the wooden platform with a single leather suitcase in his hand. 18 years old, fresh from 2 years at the University of Chicago studying engineering, he had never seen his grandfather's cabin, never walked these dusty streets, never felt the particular quality of Montana sunlight that made everything look both sharper and more faded at the same time. The telegram sat folded in his breast pocket. His mother's handwriting, small and precise. Grandfather dying. Come immediately. He wants to give you something before he goes. William had grown up on stories of Montana winters told in fragments over Sunday dinners, his father speaking in careful, measured tones about the old days, about hardship, about lessons learned through suffering. But the stories never quite connected, never formed a complete picture. They were like puzzle pieces scattered across years of conversation, and William had never understood why his father spoke about a fireplace with such peculiar reverence. The wagon ride from town took 40 minutes through open country, past homesteads that looked weathered and permanent, their log walls silvered by decades of sun and wind. The driver, an older man who introduced himself as Tucker, kept glancing at William with something like recognition. "You Samuel's grandson," Tucker said. Statement, not question. "Yes, sir," Tucker nodded, working tobacco in his cheek. "You look like him, same jaw, same way of holding your shoulders like you're ready to argue with the world." William said nothing. He had been told this before. "Your grandfather," Tucker continued, "is one of the stubbornest men I ever met. Took him a whole winter of near freezing to death before he'd admit he was wrong about something. But when he learned complete. Changed everything about how he lived. You'll see." The cabin appeared as they crested a low rise, smaller than William expected. Single-room construction, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with a steeply pitched roof and a stone chimney, rising not from the exterior wall but from the center of the structure. That detail struck William immediately. Every cabin he had seen, every fireplace in Chicago, every heating system he had studied in his engineering courses, the chimney rose along an exterior wall. Simple, straightforward, standard practice. This chimney dominated the cabin's center like a spine. Tucker pulled the wagon to a stop. "Your grandfather's inside. Doc says maybe 3 days, maybe a week. He's been waiting for you." William climbed down, the suitcase in hand, and approached the door. The interior was dim, one window on the south wall, letting in a shaft of golden afternoon light. The smell hit him first. Not unpleasant. Wood smoke, old wool, something mineral and earthy. And there in a narrow bed against the wall lay Samuel Hartwell, 66 years old, his frame reduced by illness, but his eyes still sharp and watching. "William," his grandfather said, voice weak but clear. "You came. Good, we don't have much time." William set his suitcase down and moved to the bedside. "Grandfather," he began, but Samuel lifted one hand, forestalling the pleasantries. "Look around this cabin," Samuel said. "Tell me what you see." William looked. The cabin was sparse. A table, 2 chairs, shelves with tin plates and cups. A wood stove for cooking in the corner. And the fireplace. The massive stone column that rose from below floor level, surrounded by what looked like river stones, smooth and fitted together with such precision that William could barely see the mortar lines. The firebox opening was small, maybe 20 inches across, positioned 3 feet below the wooden floorboards. The earth around it was packed dirt, covered with flat stones in a careful pattern. "I see," William said slowly, "an unusual fireplace. The chimney is centered, the firebox is underground. There's more stone here than I've ever seen in a residential heating system." Samuel smiled, tired but genuine. "That's the engineer talking. Now tell me what you feel." William stepped closer to the stone column, placed his palm against it. June in Montana, warm outside, no fire burning. But the stone was warm to the touch. Not hot, just warm. A steady ambient heat that seemed to radiate from deep within the mass. "It's warm," William said, "even with no fire." Samuel nodded. "That stone has been storing and releasing heat for 42 years, since 1882, since the winter that almost killed me and taught me the difference between knowledge and wisdom." He gestured to a small wooden box on the table beside the bed. "Bring that here." William retrieved the box. Inside was a leather journal, old and weathered, its pages thick with age. The writing was in 2 hands. The first neat and angular in a language William didn't recognize. The second rougher in English, crowding the margins with notes and diagrams. That book, Samuel said, is your real inheritance. Not this cabin, not the land, the knowledge in those pages. It's the difference between burning 90 pounds of wood a day and freezing or burning 40 pounds and staying warm through the night. It's the difference between waking every 4 hours to feed a fire like a slave or sleeping through until dawn while stone remembers what fire taught it. William opened the journal carefully. The diagram showed a fireplace unlike any he had studied. Cross-sections revealed a firebox sunk deep below ground level, surrounded by 2 feet of stone in all directions, with an ash pit extending another 3 feet below that. The measurements were precise. The notes in English, his grandfather's handwriting, spoke of thermal mass, radiant heat, storage capacity, concepts William recognized from his engineering studies, but applied in a way he had never seen. "This is Norwegian," William said, touching the original text. "Written by a man named Elias Nordstrom." Samuel said, "His grandfather built fireplaces in Tromsø, starting in 1840. 3 generations of knowledge brought to Montana in 1882. Everyone in this valley called Elias a fool, called his design backwards, said he'd freeze his family to death with his underground firebox and his wasteful use of stone." Samuel's eyes grew distant, looking past William to something 4 decades gone. "I was 24 years old that spring," Samuel continued, young, strong, confident. "I knew everything about surviving Montana. I'd made it through 6 winters. My fireplace worked. Standard construction, stone on the exterior wall, proper firebox at floor level. Good draw on the chimney. Everything by the book. Everything proven." He paused, breathing carefully. Then Elias Nordstrom arrived with his wife and children and started digging a 6-foot hole in the middle of where his cabin would be. Started hauling river stones, 4.5 tons of them, building something that looked like a monument to stubbornness. And I laughed at him, William. Stood in his yard and laughed at a man who was trying to keep his family alive. William pulled a chair close to the bedside, sensing this was the story his father had never quite been able to tell, the story that explained why a Chicago engineer spoke about a Montana fireplace with something approaching religious conviction. "Tell me," William said quietly. "Tell me what happened." Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of testimony of confession. "April 1882. I remember the day Elias arrived. Saw his wagon coming up the valley road, everything they owned packed tight. His wife Astrid sitting beside him, visibly pregnant, 3 children in the back, staring at this new country with wide Norwegian eyes. I rode over to welcome them, to offer advice, to help them avoid the mistakes newcomers always made. Found Elias walking his land, studying the ground, testing the soil. He'd crouched down, dig with his hands, feel the earth at different depths. I thought he was looking for a well site or checking for bedrock. Then he marked a spot right in the center of where his cabin would be and started digging. I asked him what he was building. He said, "A fireplace." I laughed. Not unkind, just amused. Told him fireplaces go on the floor level, not underground. Easier to build, easier to maintain, better draw on the chimney. Standard practice for 50 years of frontier construction. Elias looked at me with those calm Norwegian eyes and said, "Below ground is better. Earth around firebox stores heat, radiates slowly. Above ground fireplace loses heat to air." I shook my head and told him he was overcomplicating simple construction. Told him my fireplace worked fine, everyone's fireplace worked fine, this was proven design. He didn't argue, just opened a leather journal. His grandfather's journal showed me diagrams I couldn't fully read because they were in Norwegian, and said my grandfather built in Tromsø. Winter there is minus 40 degrees for 3 months. He never used exterior chimney after 1845. I looked at those diagrams and felt something twist in my gut. Not doubt exactly, just a flicker of uncertainty. But I pushed it down. What worked in Norway didn't necessarily work in Montana. Different country, different methods. Samuel opened his eyes and looked at William directly. That was my first mistake. Thinking geography mattered more than physics. Heat is heat. Stone is stone. The principles don't change because you cross an ocean. Over the next weeks, more of us went to watch Elias dig. It became a kind of entertainment. The Norwegian digging his crazy hole, 6 feet deep, 3 feet for the firebox level, 3 feet below that for the ash pit. When neighbors asked why so deep, Elias explained in his accented but clear English. Ash pit holds full winter of ash. Clean once per year. Stone below firebox stores, heat radiates up, creates heat reservoir. Margaret Brennan, a widow who'd built her own cabin and fireplace after her husband died in a logging accident, she brought bread over one day and asked Elias if he was building a root cellar by mistake. Told him fireplaces need air, need draft, need to be above ground to function properly. Elias explained the chimney would still draw because draft depends on height differential, not whether the firebox is above or below ground. Margaret shook her head and walked away. Later, she told me she felt sorry for Elias's wife pregnant and trusting her husband to build something that would obviously fail. Then there was Thomas Bradford, wealthiest man in the valley. He'd hired a professional mason from Denver, a man named Henry Caldwell, to build his fireplace 2 years prior. Bradford brought Caldwell back to examine Elias's work, thinking a professional opinion would settle the matter. I was there that day. Watched Caldwell walk around Elias's excavation, studying the stonework that was beginning to rise around the firebox. Watched him measure the thickness of the stone walls. 2 feet, solid river stone fitted tight, extending 18 inches above what would be floor level. Caldwell was a man of authority, 30 years building fireplaces from St. Louis to Sacramento, 200 fireplaces to his name. He looked at Elias's design and pronounced it wasteful. Said 8 to 12 inches of stone was sufficient to contain fire safely. 2 feet was excessive, unnecessary labor and material. Elias listened politely and then asked one question. Mr. Caldwell, how many of your 200 fireplaces were built for minus 30-degree winters? Caldwell went quiet, thought about it, finally admitted he'd never built in conditions that extreme. Elias nodded and said, "You build to contain fire. I build to store heat." Different purposes. Samuel's breathing had become more labored. William reached for the water glass on the bedside table, helped his grandfather drink. "Rest," William said. "You don't have to tell it all now." Samuel shook his head weakly. "Yes, I do, because in 3 days or 3 weeks I'll be gone, and this story dies with me unless you hear it complete, unless you understand what that stone column means." He settled back against the pillow, gathering himself. By July, Elias was hauling stone from the river, 4.5 tons total, each stone 20 to 30 pounds. River rocks smooth from centuries of water, dense and heat retentive. He carried them a quarter mile one by one or 2 at a time in a wheelbarrow, his children helping when they could. We all thought he was mad. That much stone for a simple fireplace. That much labor when he could have built something conventional in half the time. But he kept working, methodical, patient, building the ash pit with its iron door at floor level, laying a 3-foot thick bed of stone below where the firebox would sit. Then the firebox itself, 20 inches wide, 30 inches deep, only 18 inches high, half the size of a standard firebox. When Bradford's mason saw the small firebox, he told Elias it was undersized. Said professional standard was larger opening for better heat output. Elias explained that large firebox wastes heat up the chimney. Small firebox concentrates heat into stone mass. Less heat escapes, more heat stored. The mason walked away muttering about amateurs who didn't understand thermodynamics. But I remember standing there looking at that small firebox surrounded by all that stone and, for the first time, wondering if maybe, just maybe, Elias knew something we didn't. The chimney construction made everyone shake their heads. Standard frontier practice was to build the chimney up the exterior wall. Simple, straightforward, easier to repair. Elias built his chimney straight through the center of his cabin, stone column rising from the underground firebox through the floor, through the cabin interior, through the roof. I asked him why. Told him exterior was standard, easier to maintain, didn't consume interior space. He said exterior chimney loses heat to outside air. Stone column heating up, then radiating heat to cold air outside cabin. Wasted. Interior chimney radiates heat into living space. Every BTU from fire stays inside. I understood the logic. Didn't want to accept it, but understood it. Then there was the floor. Elias built his cabin floor from packed earth rather than raised wooden planks. Just the ground leveled and compacted, covered with flat stones around the fireplace area. Margaret Brennan saw this and called it primitive. Said proper cabins had raised wooden floors to keep you dry and separated from the ground. Elias explained that raised floor separates you from thermal mass. His fireplace would heat stone and earth below. Heat radiates up. Earth floor allows that radiant heat into the living space. Wooden floor would insulate you from the heat source. Margaret told him earth floors were cold. That's why civilized people built raised floors. Elias said Earth 3 feet down stays 45 to 50 degrees year-round. Not cold, not hot, stable. Fire heats earth and stone around firebox raises temperature to 80 or 90 degrees. Radiant heat comes through floor keeps feet warm. She didn't believe him. None of us did. Samuel paused again, his face showing the pain of old regrets. September 18th, 1882. Astrid Nordstrom went into labor. The cabin was mostly complete, but the fireplace wasn't yet functional. Margaret went to help with the birth. She was the closest thing to a midwife we had. I went along because Samuel Hartwell was the kind of neighbor who showed up when families needed help, even if he thought their husband was building a monument to foolishness. I watched Astrid labor through the afternoon and evening. Watched Elias hold her hand, whisper to her in Norwegian, promise her the baby would be healthy and the fireplace would keep them warm through winter. Margaret did her work efficiently, and when the baby came a boy, they named Jonas. 7 pounds and healthy, Elias took his son and sat beside the unfinished fireplace. I'll never forget what he said. Spoke to that infant in English so we could all understand. Said, "You will never wake to frozen water inside the house like I did as a child. This stone will keep you warm, I promise you." Margaret looked at me and shook her head. A man promising his newborn son that a hole in the ground would keep him warm. We thought it was tragic. By late October, the fireplace was complete. The firebox sat 3 feet below floor level, surrounded by 2 feet of stone in all directions. The stone extended 18 inches above floor, creating a raised platform around the central chimney. The ash pit sat 3 feet below the firebox with access through a small iron door. The entire structure was massive, probably 4.5 tons of stone. The center of the cabin was dominated by this thick stone column that rose from below ground through the roof. It looked wrong, too much stone, too much mass. The firebox opening was small and positioned below floor level. You had to crouch down to add wood. The earth floor around it looked primitive. The whole design seemed backwards. My fireplace looked right. Stone construction on the exterior wall, proper firebox at floor level, good chimney rising up the outside, standard practice that had worked for generations. Thomas Bradford's fireplace looked right. Built by a paid professional for specifications, perfect draw. Everyone who saw it praised the construction. Elias's fireplace looked like a mistake, like something built by someone who didn't understand American construction methods, like it would smoke, fail to heat adequately, prove impossible to maintain. The Valley consensus was gentle but clear. Elias Nordstrom had built an overcomplicated fireplace that would underperform compared to proven designs. We felt sorry for his family, felt sorry for his wife and newborn son who would suffer through winter because of one man's stubborn refusal to build correctly. Thomas Bradford held a fireplace completion party at his place in late October. Called it a celebration of autumn, but really it was a gathering to show off his professional fireplace and subtly mock Elias's design. Bradford raised a toast, said, "To Mr. Nordstrom's creative design, may it serve him half as well as proven methods have served us. We'll check on you come February." There was nervous laughter. Elias didn't join the toast. Just looked at his stone column, ran his hand over it, whispered something to Astrid that I couldn't hear. Later, Tucker told me what Elias had said. "Let winter be the judge." And winter came. November 15th, 1882. First serious cold. Temperature dropped to 15 degrees overnight. Not extreme, just the first hint of real winter. I started my morning fire at 5 a.m. Added split pine and oak, good dry wood, got flames going strong within 10 minutes. By 6 a.m., my cabin was warming. The area directly in front of the fireplace reached maybe 70 degrees, comfortable. But the back of my cabin, 20 feet from the fireplace, stayed at 45 degrees, cold enough to see your breath. My cabin had temperature zones, within 6 feet of the fire warm, 8 to 12 feet away, cool, farther than 12 feet cold. This was normal, expected. Everyone's cabin was like this. You dressed for the cold areas and stayed near the fire when possible. Wood consumption was moderate, maybe 30 pounds for the day, reasonable for the temperature. Margaret Brennan had similar results. Front of cabin, warm back cold. Her daughter Anna, 15 years old, wore 2 sweaters indoors. Thomas Bradford's professionally built fireplace performed excellently according to all standards. Drew perfectly burned efficiently, created good heat in the immediate vicinity of the firebox, but his cabin showed the same temperature gradient. Warm near the fire, cold away from it. At noon that day, I stopped by Elias's cabin. Neighborly check, making sure the Norwegian and his family were managing with their unusual setup. I stepped through the door and felt the difference immediately. No temperature zones, no cold corners, just even stable warmth throughout the space. 62 degrees everywhere. The back wall, the corners, the area near the door, all the same temperature. I stood there confused, trying to understand what I was feeling. The fire in Elias's small firebox was modest, not roaring, just burning steadily. But the entire cabin was warm. "How much wood are you burning?" I asked. Elias said, "Started with maybe 15 pounds this morning, added 10 pounds an hour ago. 25 pounds total so far. I had burned 35 pounds to achieve worse results. My cabin was warmer near the fireplace, but colder everywhere else. Average temperature was probably 55 degrees with massive variation. Elias's cabin was uniformly 62 degrees using less wood. I walked to the back of the cabin and knelt down, placing my palm on the earth floor. It was warm, not hot, but noticeably warm, comfortable to touch. "Your fireplace is heating the floor," I said. Elias nodded. Stone mass around firebox heated to maybe 200 degrees now. Radiating heat in all directions. Up through floor, out through stone, surround above floor into cabin air. Radiant heat warms surfaces instead of just air. Surfaces then warm air slowly, evenly. I thought about my own fireplace approach. Fire heated air. Hot air rose toward the ceiling and eventually escaped through gaps in the roof. The air near the floor stayed cold because heat rose away from it. Elias's approach heated stone. Stone radiated to all surfaces. Surfaces stayed warm and warmed the air around them evenly. Different physics, different results. I left his cabin without saying much. Didn't want to admit what I was starting to suspect. That maybe the Norwegian wasn't a fool. That maybe 3 generations of American fireplace construction had missed something fundamental. But I still had my pride. Still had my conviction that my way was right. December would begin to break that conviction. January would shatter it completely. Samuel stopped, exhausted by the telling. William sat quietly, the leather journal open on his lap, the diagrams beginning to make sense in light of his grandfather's story. The stone column behind him radiated its steady warmth, and William understood now that he was sitting in the presence of something more than architecture. He was sitting in the presence of knowledge earned through suffering, wisdom paid for in frozen nights and exhausted children, and the terrible mathematics of wood supply running out. Grandfather William said softly, "What happened in December?" Samuel smiled weakly. "That's when the real cold came, boy. That's when we learned the difference between a fireplace that burns wood and a fireplace that remembers fire. But that's enough for today. I'm tired." William helped his grandfather drink more water, adjusted his pillows, pulled the thin blanket higher. As he did, Samuel reached out and gripped William's wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me something," Samuel said. "Promise me you'll read that journal, study those diagrams, learn what Elias taught me. Because someday you'll build a home, and when you do, you need to know that the easy way isn't always the right way. That sometimes the thing that looks backwards is the only thing that works." "I promise," William said. Samuel released his grip and closed his eyes. "Good. Now let me rest. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the night 11 people slept around that stone because everyone else's fireplaces had failed and their wood had run out and the temperature outside was 30 below zero. I'll tell you about the night I learned that pride kills and humility saves and stone remembers what fire teaches long after the flames die." William sat in the chair beside the bed as his grandfather's breathing deepened into sleep. The afternoon light slanted lower through the window. The stone column stood silent in the center of the cabin, holding its warmth, keeping its promise made 42 years ago to a newborn boy who would grow up never knowing the terror of waking to frozen water inside his own home. And William Hartwell Jr., 18 years old engineering student, began to understand that some knowledge cannot be taught in universities. Some wisdom can only be learned through winter and stone, and the terrible clarity that comes when every assumption you held proves false, and the man you laughed at becomes the man who saves your life. The next morning arrived cold and clear, June frost melting off the grass by the time William woke in the small loft space above his grandfather's bed. Below, he could hear Samuel coughing, a wet, struggling sound that spoke of lungs filling with something other than air. William climbed down the ladder quickly. His grandfather was awake, propped against pillows, eyes fever bright, but still focused. On the table beside the bed sat a tin cup of water and the leather journal open to a page dense with his grandfather's handwritten notes. December 1882. Samuel said without preamble, "That's when we learned the difference between surviving and dying. Sit down, boy. This part of the story gets dark before it gets light." William pulled the chair close and waited. December 1st. Temperature dropped to 5 degrees at night. Not terrible, but sustained. Cold that settled in and stayed. My wood consumption jumped to 40 pounds a day. Morning fire, midday fire, evening fire. Constant feeding to maintain adequate temperature. But here's what I didn't understand yet. Temperature zones in my cabin got worse as it got colder. Within 6 feet of the fire, I could keep it at 65, 70 degrees. But the back of the cabin where my son slept dropped to 40 degrees at night. I moved his bed closer to the fire. We all started sleeping within 8 feet of the flames. Margaret Brennan did the same. Thomas Bradford did the same. We all accepted it as normal. This is how winter works. You cluster near the heat source. You accept the cold zones. You burn more wood. By December 10th, I was burning 50 pounds a day. I sat down one evening and did the mathematics. 50 pounds per day. Winter lasting until April, 5 months total. 50 times 30 days equals 1,500 pounds per month. 1,500 times 5 equals 7,500 pounds total. I had 20 cords, roughly 12,000 pounds. I was safe. Plenty of margin. But that calculation assumed the cold wouldn't get worse. Assumed December cold was as bad as it would get. I was wrong. Old William Tucker stopped by my place around that time. Tucker had lived in Montana since the 1850s, survived winters that killed whole families. He looked at my wood pile, looked at how fast I was burning through it, and shook his head. "Sam," he said, "I've seen winters like this before. 1856, 1867. Once temperature drops below 10 degrees in early January, it'll hit 30 below by month's end. You might want to start rationing now." I laughed him off. Told him I had 20 cords, told him even at 75 pounds a day, I'd make it fine. Tucker just looked at me with those old trapper eyes and said, "Not if it goes to 90 pounds a day. Not if it goes to 100. I didn't believe him. Couldn't imagine burning that much wood. Couldn't imagine cold that required that kind of consumption. Meanwhile, Elias Nordstrom was burning 30 pounds a day. His cabin stayed at 60 to 65 degrees throughout. No temperature zones, no cold corners. His children played on floors warm enough to sit on comfortably. His wife nursed baby Jonas in a cabin that required no extra blankets, no huddling near the fire. I visited him mid-December. Couldn't help myself. Had to see how he was managing. Found him outside splitting wood, steady, rhythmic work. His pile looked barely touched. I asked how much he was burning. 30 pounds a day, he said. Maybe 35 if wind is strong. I was burning 50. Margaret was burning 50. Bradford was burning 60. How, I asked, "How is your cabin so much more efficient?" Elias stopped splitting and leaned on his axe. "Samuel," he said, "your fireplace heats air. Air rises, escapes through roof, carries heat away. My fireplace heats stone. Stone radiates in all directions. Up through floor, out through walls of stone surrounding firebox, into air slowly. Stone holds heat for hours after fire dies. Your fire dies, heat stops immediately. My fire dies, stone keeps radiating for 8–10 hours." I understood the words, didn't want to accept the implications, because accepting meant admitting I'd built wrong, meant admitting 6 years of confidence was misplaced. So I nodded politely and went home and told myself Elias just had a smaller cabin, less space to heat different circumstances. But the seed of doubt was growing. December 15th, Anna Brennan, Margaret's daughter, developed a cough. Not serious at first, just a persistent hack that worried her mother. Margaret increased her wood consumption to 55 pounds a day, trying to keep Anna's room warmer. The girl was 15 strong, but sickness in winter could turn dangerous fast. Margaret came to me 3 days later, exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Asked if I'd watch Anna for an hour while she went to gather more firewood. I agreed. Sat with the girl in Margaret's cabin. The fireplace was roaring, Margaret burning wood like she had an endless supply. But Anna's room, even just 15 feet from the fire, was cold. Maybe 45 degrees. The girl was wrapped in 3 blankets, still shivering, coughing into a cloth. Anna looked at me with fever-bright eyes and said, "Mr. Hartwell, why doesn't our fireplace work like Mr. Nordstrom's? Mary Nordstrom told me their cabin is warm everywhere. She doesn't have to sleep in her coat." I had no answer for her. That night, Margaret swallowed her pride and took Anna to stay at the Nordstrom cabin for 3 days. Elias and Astrid took them in without question. Margaret told me later that within 2 hours of being in that constant warmth, Anna's coughing eased. Within 3 days, the girl was well enough to return home. Margaret came to my place after bringing Anna back, sat at my table and said something I'll never forget. "Samuel," she said, "I built my fireplace with my dead husband's hands helping mine. Laid every stone. I'm proud of that fireplace. But pride doesn't keep my daughter alive. Elias Nordstrom's stone column kept her alive. I don't understand how it works. Don't care anymore. Next summer, I'm tearing mine out and rebuilding exactly like his." I told her she was being hasty. Told her one mild illness didn't prove anything. But I was lying to her and to myself. I could feel the truth pressing in. Could feel the cold mathematics starting to shift against me. December became January. Temperature dropped to 10 below zero at night. My wood consumption jumped to 75 pounds a day. I was burning wood continuously now. Morning, midday, and evening, night. Someone had to tend the fire every 4 hours or the cabin would drop below 40 degrees. My wife Mary and I took shifts. I'd wake at 2 a.m., stumble to the fireplace in the dark, add 20 pounds of wood, wait for it to catch, go back to bed. 4 hours later, Mary would do the same. Then me again. Then her. Endless cycle. We were rotting from exhaustion. Our son was 2 years old, started sleeping in his coat, started showing signs of cold stress, lethargy, poor appetite, constant low-level shivering even inside. I recalculated my wood supply. 75 pounds per day. That was over a cord per month. At that rate, my 20 cords would last just under 19 months. Still safe mathematically. But Tucker's words kept echoing. What if it goes to 90 pounds a day? 100. Thomas Bradford was burning 85 pounds daily. His larger cabin, his 4 children, all requiring more heat. His professional fireplace with his perfect draw was consuming wood at terrifying rates. His wife Emily started closing off bedrooms, moving all 4 children to sleep in the main room near the fire. I saw Emily in town mid-January. She looked haunted. Told me quietly that at their current consumption rate, they'd run out of wood by mid-March. Winter wouldn't end until April. She asked if I had wood to spare, if Thomas could buy some. I told her no. Told her I was rationing my own supply. Told her to talk to Elias Nordstrom, who seemed to have endless wood because he burned so little. Emily's face hardened. She said Thomas won't ask. Pride won't let him. But I might, for my children. I understood. Pride was a luxury. Survival wasn't. Samuel paused, his breathing labored. William helped him drink water, waited while his grandfather gathered strength. January 18th, 1883. Samuel continued. That's the night everything changed. That's the night I learned what true cold means. Temperature dropped to 22 below zero. Sustained. Wind howling out of the north at 20 miles per hour. Wind chill pushing effective temperature to 40 below. I loaded my fireplace at 10 p.m. before bed. 20 pounds of wood, big load, enough to burn for several hours. The area near the fire was 68 degrees. The back of the cabin was 48. My son was sleeping 8 feet from the flames, wrapped in every blanket we owned. 2 a.m. I woke from habit. The fire had died to coals. Cabin temperature was dropping fast. I added more wood, got flames going, but I could feel the cold pressing in through every gap in the walls, every space around the door. The fire was fighting a losing battle. 4 a.m., the fire was coals again. I woke shivering, added wood, sat there feeding the flames, watching them eat through my supply, understanding with terrible clarity that at this rate, 20 pounds every 4 hours, I was burning 120 pounds per day. 120 pounds per day meant less than a cord per week. Meant my 20 cord supply would last maybe 15 weeks. We were in week 12 of winter. 8 weeks remained until April. The mathematics had turned against me. Mary woke around 5 a.m. and found me sitting by the fire staring at the woodpile. She saw my face and knew. "We're going to run out," she said. Quiet statement of fact. I nodded. "If the cold stays like this?" "Yes." "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. At 6 a.m., I walked to Elias Nordstrom's cabin. Needed to see how he was managing. Needed to understand if everyone was facing the same crisis or if it was just me, just my failed fireplace design. Found Elias outside at dawn, splitting wood in the blue pre-dawn light. His breath plumed in the frozen air, but his movements were steady, unhurried. His woodpile looked almost untouched. "How much are you burning?" I asked. No greeting, just the question. Elias looked at me and saw something in my face. 45 pounds yesterday, he said. Maybe 50 today because of the wind. But the stone holds heat so well that even in this cold cabin, stays above 55 degrees through the night. "I'm burning 120, I said. Elias stopped splitting, set down his axe. "Samuel," he said gently, "you need to bring your family here. Tonight, before you exhaust yourself completely." "I can't," I said. "I have wood left. I just need to ration better." Elias studied me. "How much wood left?" "Maybe 14 cords. At 120 pounds per day, that's less than 3 weeks. "What happens then?" "Winter won't be over. I'll figure something out." Elias put his hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, warm, even through my coat. "Samuel," he said, "there's no shame in accepting help. My grandfather used to say, pride is the coldest fire. It burns bright, but gives no heat." I pulled away, told him I'd manage, walked back to my cabin with my back straight and my pride intact and my mind doing mathematics that spelled out doom. That same day, Margaret Brennan ran out of wood completely. She'd been burning 90 pounds a day trying to keep Anna warm, trying to prevent the cough from returning. 90 pounds a day through 18 cords meant she'd exhausted her supply in just over 14 weeks. I found her at noon sitting in her cold cabin, Anna wrapped in blankets, both of them shivering. Margaret wasn't crying, just sitting there with empty eyes looking at her beautiful fireplace, the one she'd built with her dead husband, the one that had failed her when she needed it most. I helped them carry what belongings they could to Elias's cabin. Elias took them in without hesitation, set them up in the warm corner near the stone column. Within an hour, Anna had stopped shivering. Within 2 hours, color was back in her face. Margaret sat with her back against the warm stone and cried. Not from sadness, from relief. From the terrible release of admitting defeat and finding it led to salvation rather than death. That night, back in my own cabin, I held my son close and felt him shivering, despite being 8 feet from a roaring fire. Felt Mary pressed against my other side, both of us trying to share warmth. And I understood with perfect clarity that Margaret had made the right choice. But I couldn't make it yet. Not yet. February came with sustained cold, 30 below for 2 solid weeks. My consumption stayed at 120 pounds per day, sometimes higher. I was burning through a cord every 6 days. Did the mathematics again. 14 cords left. 1 cord every 6 days meant 84 days of fuel. 12 weeks. Winter would end in 8 weeks. I should have been safe. Should have had margin. But the calculation assumed the cold wouldn't get worse, assumed no unexpected freezing events, assumed perfect efficiency. And I was so tired, so exhausted from waking every 4 hours for 2 straight months. My hands shook. My thoughts moved through fog. Mary was the same. We were breaking. Our son stopped playing, just sat wrapped in blankets, staring at the fire. 2 years old and already learning that cold was the permanent condition, that warmth was temporary and required constant vigilance. February 10th, Thomas Bradford came to my cabin at dawn. His face was gray. He asked if I had wood to sell. I told him no. Told him I was rationing my own supply. He offered to pay triple. Offered gold. I refused, not from cruelty, from fear. Because if I sold him wood, I might not have enough for my own family. The cold had turned us all into hoarders, protecting our piles like dragons guarding treasure. Bradford left without another word. That afternoon, Emily Bradford took her 4 children to Elias Nordstrom's cabin. She sent Thomas a note. Said, "I won't let our children freeze because of your pride. Come or don't come. We'll be at the Nordstrom cabin." Thomas didn't come. Not that day. But Emily and the children stayed sleeping on the floor around that massive stone column, warm for the first time in weeks. February 20th, I burned my last piece of split wood at dawn, stared at my wood pile. Just rough logs remained. Unsplit, maybe half a cord total, maybe 3 days of fuel if I split frantically and burned carefully. 3 days of fuel, 3 weeks of winter remaining. Mary looked at me across the cabin. Our son was crying, hungry, cold. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. I walked to Elias Nordstrom's cabin at mid-morning. The sun was bright but gave no warmth. My breath froze in the air. My hands were numb despite heavy gloves. Found Elias outside, as always working. He saw me coming and stood waiting. I stopped 10 feet away. Couldn't make myself walk closer. Couldn't make the words come. Elias walked to me, stood there in the frozen morning. Said, "You're out of wood." I nodded. "Bring your family. Now, today." The words cracked something in my chest. The pride, the certainty, the conviction that I could manage alone, it all shattered. I tried to speak, to say thank you, to apologize for laughing at his design, for doubting him. But nothing came out except a sound like a sob. Elias gripped my shoulders. "No shame, Samuel. No shame in survival. Bring them now." An hour later, Mary and I and our son walked to the Nordstrom cabin with what belongings we could carry. Walked into that warm space where Margaret and Anna already sat near the stone, where Emily Bradford's 4 children played quietly in the even heat, where Elias and Astrid moved through their daily routines as if housing 11 people was the most natural thing in the world. The stone column dominated the center of the space. 4.5 tons of river rock heated to perhaps 200 degrees in its core, radiating steadily in all directions. The floor was warm under my feet. The air was warm against my face. The temperature was 60 degrees everywhere. No variation, no cold zones. That first night, 11 of us slept on the floor around that stone. Elias had built a small fire in the evening from 6 to 9 p.m., 20 pounds of wood. Let it burn down to coals and then die completely by 10 p.m. I lay there in the dark, waiting for the cold to creep in, waiting for that familiar dropping temperature that would force someone to wake and rebuild the fire. But it didn't come. The stone radiated its steady heat through the night. At 2 a.m., my old waking time, I opened my eyes. The cabin was dark, no fire burning, but the temperature was still 58 degrees. The floor under me was warm. My son slept without shivering, without his coat, just a light blanket. I reached out and placed my palm against the stone column. It was warm to the touch, not hot, just warm, like a living thing breathing heat into the space. Beside me, Margaret Brennan whispered in the darkness, "It's still warm. The fire's been out for 4 hours and the stone is still warm." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Understood finally completely what Elias had tried to explain back in April when I'd stood in his yard and laughed. Fire produces heat. Stone stores it. When fire dies, heat doesn't stop. Stone releases slowly what it absorbed during burning. At 6 a.m., Elias woke and built another small fire. 20 pounds. The stone column, which had cooled from perhaps 200 degrees to 150 overnight, began absorbing heat again, charging back up, storing energy for the next night's radiation. 60 pounds per day total for 11 people. Less than 6 pounds per person. I had been burning over 100 pounds per day for just 3 people. Over 30 pounds per person. The stone was 4 times more efficient. No, that wasn't right. The stone wasn't more efficient. The stone was working according to principles I'd never understood. Thermal mass, heat storage, radiant transfer. Concepts I'd heard in passing, but never grasped in practice. 3 days later, Thomas Bradford arrived. He stood in the doorway looking at his wife and children sleeping peacefully around the stone, looking at me and Margaret and our families, all of us warm and safe. I watched his face as his pride broke. Watched the exact moment he accepted that his professional fireplace, his expensive mason, his conviction and proven methods, all of it had failed while a Norwegian immigrant's backwards design had succeeded. Elias stood and walked to him. No words, just gestured to an empty space near the stone. Thomas Bradford, wealthiest man in the valley, most successful homesteader, stepped inside and sat down with the rest of us. 11 people living around a 4.5-ton stone column that remembered fire and gave back warmth long after flames died. We stayed there for 3 weeks, through the end of February through early March until the thaw came and temperatures rose above freezing during the day. 11 people learning through cold nights in warm stone that everything we'd believed about heating about fireplaces, about survival in Montana was wrong. And when spring came, when we could finally return to our own cabins, we came back changed, humbled, ready to learn. Samuel fell silent, exhausted. William sat very still, the leather journal heavy in his lap. Around them, the stone column radiated its eternal warmth, keeping promises made 42 years ago. Tomorrow, Samuel whispered, I'll tell you about the rebuilding, about how we learned to dig to place stone to create our own thermal mass, about the ones who tried to take shortcuts and failed, about the ones who did it right and survived the next 40 winters without fear. But for now, rest, William, and remember, sometimes the thing that looks backwards is the only thing that faces the truth. William woke on the third morning to find his grandfather already awake, propped against pillows, staring at the stone column with an expression that mixed reverence and regret. The early light came through the window at a sharp angle, catching dust motes in the air, and for a moment the old man looked translucent, as if he were already fading into memory. Grandfather, William said quietly. Samuel turned his head slowly. The fever was worse today. William could see it in the glassy brightness of his eyes, the tremor in his hands. But the old man's voice when he spoke was clear. Last part of the story, boy. The part about learning, about how we rebuilt, about how some of us succeeded and some failed, even after seeing the truth demonstrated right in front of us. Sit, listen. This is the knowledge you need. William pulled the chair close and opened the leather journal to a page showing detailed construction diagrams. His grandfather nodded approval. March 22nd, 1883. The thaw came sudden and complete. Temperature rose to 35 degrees overnight. Snow began melting. The 3-week ordeal was over. We left the Nordstrom cabin that morning. All of us returned to our own cold homes to assess the damage and plan for the next winter, because we all understood now. What had happened wasn't an anomaly. Montana winters came like this every few years. 1856, 1867, 1883, and they would come again. I stood in my cabin looking at my conventional fireplace, the beautiful stone construction on the exterior wall, the proper firebox at floor level, the good draw. Everything built exactly to standard, everything that had failed. My woodpile was completely empty, burned through in 4 months. If Elias hadn't taken us in, my family would have frozen. Simple as that. My son would have died because his father was too proud and too ignorant to build correctly. That knowledge sat in my chest like a stone, cold and heavy and permanent. I walked to Elias's cabin mid-morning, found him outside with his children teaching his oldest boy how to split wood. Patient instruction in that accented English, showing the boy where to look for the grain, how to position the log, where to strike. Elias saw me and straightened. Samuel, he said, is your cabin intact? Yes, but I'm rebuilding the fireplace. Will you teach me? Elias studied my face for a long moment. Then he nodded once. First step, he said, dig. We walked to my cabin. I showed him where I wanted the new fireplace. Center of the room, interior location so the stone would radiate into living space rather than outside. Elias knelt, tested the soil. Good earth, he said, not too rocky. You'll dig 6 feet down. 3 feet for firebox level, 3 feet below that for ash pit. 6 feet seemed impossible, but I started that afternoon. Broke ground in the center of my cabin floor, began the excavation that would take 2 weeks of hard labor. The first day I dug 3 feet down, back-breaking work. The earth was packed, hard, dense with clay. My hands blistered, my back screamed, but I kept digging because I could still feel the cold of those February nights, could still see my son shivering despite being 8 feet from a roaring fire. By the end of the second day, I'd reached 6 feet, stood in the bottom of that hole, and looked up at the cabin floor level, far above me. The excavation was 6 feet deep, 4 feet square, a massive pit in my cabin floor. Elias came to inspect. Nodded approval. Now you understand why so deep? I shook my head. Stone below firebox stores heat, Elias explained. 3 feet of stone foundation below where fire burns. That stone absorbs heat from fire, radiates down into earth and up into firebox. Creates heat reservoir. When fire goes out, stone below is still 200 degrees. Radiates up through firebox floor. Keeps firebox warm. Keeps coals alive longer. Makes morning fire easy to start. He climbed down into the pit with me. Showed me how to begin laying the ash pit. 3 feet deep with iron door at floor level. Then the stone foundation. 3 feet thick below the firebox. River stones fitted tight, creating a massive bed of thermal mass. Why river stones, I asked. Why not quarried stone? River stones are dense, Elias said. Tumbled smooth by centuries of water. No cracks, no air pockets. They hold heat better than quarried stone with fractures. We spent 3 days hauling stones from the river. Each stone 20 to 30 pounds, 4.5 tons total. I carried them in a wheelbarrow, 2 or 3 at a time, quarter-mile from the river to my cabin. Exhausting work, but necessary. Margaret Brennan started her excavation the same week. Thomas Bradford started his 2 days after me. We worked in parallel 3 households, tearing out failed fireplaces and building new ones based on Norwegian knowledge brought across an ocean. Emily Bradford came to watch one afternoon, stood at the edge of my excavation pit and looked down at me, covered in dirt and sweat. Thomas won't admit he was wrong, she said quietly, but he's digging just as deep as you, following Mr. Nordstrom's instructions exactly. Pride keeps him from saying it, but he knows. I nodded, said nothing. Understood that some knowledge comes with too much shame attached to speak of it directly. By May, I had laid the ash pit in the 3-foot stone foundation below the firebox. Elias came daily to supervise, to correct mistakes, to explain the principles. The firebox itself was small, 20 inches wide, 30 inches deep, 18 inches high. Half the size of my old firebox. When I questioned this, Elias explained patiently, large firebox means large fire. Large fire means lots of heat up chimney. Most heat lost. Small firebox means smaller fire burning more efficiently. Heat has less space to escape. More heat transfers to stone mass surrounding. More storage, less waste. I built the walls around the firebox 2 feet thick. Solid river stone in all directions. Elias had me feel the thickness as we worked. Fire burns here in center, he said, indicating the firebox. Heats inner layer of stone to maybe 500 degrees. That heat transfers through stone. Outer layer of stone reaches maybe 200 degrees. That outer layer radiates into cabin for hours after fire dies. 8-10 hours, through the whole night. I placed my hand on the outer surface of the stone wall we were building. 2 feet of solid rock. Imagined it warm. Imagined it radiating heat long after I'd gone to sleep. Imagined my son sleeping warm without me having to wake every 4 hours. The chimney construction was the hardest part. Interior chimney meant building through the floor, through the cabin interior, through the roof. Structural complications. Careful framing required, but Elias was insistent. Exterior chimney wastes maybe 30% of total heat to outside air. Interior chimney keeps 100% inside. Over full winter, that difference is several cords of wood. Several cords means difference between running out and having surplus. I understood now. Understood in my bones, in my exhausted muscles, in my memory of February cold. Every design choice Elias made had a reason. Every piece of the system worked together. By late May, my fireplace was complete. 6 feet of stone below ground. Firebox at 3 feet below floor level. 2 feet of stone surrounding the firebox in all directions. Interior chimney, stone platform extending 18 inches above floor. Earth floor throughout. Massive, heavy, probably 5 tons of stone. It dominated the center of my cabin exactly the way Elias's dominated his. Margaret finished hers in early June. Thomas Bradford finished mid-June. All 3 of us had built according to Elias's specifications, followed his instructions exactly, trusted the knowledge that had saved our lives, but not everyone did. James Peterson, a homesteader who lived 5 miles east, had watched our struggles through the winter. His conventional fireplace had performed poorly, but he'd had enough wood to make it through. Barely. He decided to rebuild that summer, adopting Elias's design. But Peterson tried to save effort. He dug only 4 feet down instead of 6. Figured that was close enough. Built his stone surround only 12 inches thick instead of 2 feet. Thought it would be sufficient. Elias visited Peterson's construction site and warned him, 12 inches will not store enough heat. You need 2 feet. 4 feet excavation is not enough. You need 6 feet for proper thermal mass. Peterson waved him off, said, I'm sure it'll be fine. Close enough is good enough. Then there was Clara Ashford, a widow rebuilding alone. She followed Elias's depth and thickness specifications exactly. 6 feet down, 2 feet of stone. But she positioned her fireplace on the exterior wall rather than cabin center. Easier construction, she explained to Elias. I can't build through my roof alone. Don't have the strength. Elias offered to help. Clara refused. Pride, maybe. Or a widow's determination to do everything herself. He warned her. Exterior position loses 20 to 30% heat through wall to outside air. Interior position keeps all heat inside. Clara built it anyway. Exterior wall, perfect depth, perfect stone thickness, wrong position. Robert Crawford rebuilt with proper depth and thickness. 6 feet down, 2 feet of stone. Interior chimney. But he made his firebox 30 inches wide instead of 20. The conventional size he was accustomed to. Elias explained. Large firebox means large fire. Large fire sends heat up chimney before stone can absorb. You need small, concentrated, efficient fire. Crawford ignored the advice. Said, I'm used to big fires, I'll make it work. 3 households rebuilt with shortcuts or modifications. 3 households convinced they could improve on Elias's design or adapt it to their preferences. Winter 1883 to 84 would teach them. Samuel paused, his breathing labored. William gave him water, waited patiently. Outside, the June afternoon was warm, but inside the cabin, the stone maintained its steady temperature, demonstrating 42 years later the principles his grandfather was describing. December 1883, Samuel continued. Cold returned, not as severe as the previous year, but cold enough. 0 degrees at night, sustained. My new fireplace performed exactly as Elias had promised. I started my fire in the morning, added modest amounts of wood. The small firebox burned efficiently. Heat transferred into the massive stone surround. By midday, my cabin was uniformly warm. 62 degrees everywhere. No temperature zones, no cold corners, just even radiant heat from the thermal mass that had been charged by my morning fire. I let my fire die at night, just let it burn down to nothing. Went to bed. The stone continued radiating. My cabin stayed above 55 degrees until morning. I slept through full nights for the first time in 2 winters. No waking to tend fire, no interruption, just rest while thermal mass did its work. My wood consumption was 40 pounds daily. The previous winter, with my conventional fireplace, I'd burned 90 pounds daily and still been cold. Margaret Brennan reported similar results. Uniform heating, night-long warmth from dead fires, dramatically reduced wood consumption. Thomas Bradford's larger cabin required more heating, but his massive thermal mass handled it easily. 50 pounds daily for a cabin twice the size of mine. The previous winter, he'd burned 95 pounds and still had cold bedrooms. We had succeeded, the 3 of us who followed Elias's instructions exactly. We had rebuilt correctly, and the results were undeniable. But Peterson, Ashford, and Crawford learned different lessons. Peterson's fireplace, with only 12 inches of stone and 4 feet of excavation, worked better than conventional design. But not well enough. The thin stone couldn't store sufficient heat. It charged quickly during burning, but discharged quickly overnight. His cabin would cool significantly through the night, even though the stone was still releasing some warmth. His wood consumption was 60 pounds daily. Better than his old 90 pounds, but far from my 40 pounds with proper thermal mass. Peterson came to my cabin in January, stood looking at my stone column, and said simply, I should have built full thickness. Tried to save effort. Cost me performance all winter. He rebuilt properly the next spring. Full 6-foot excavation, 2 feet of stone surround. The following winter, his consumption dropped to 48 pounds daily, and his cabin stayed warm through the night. Clara Ashford's fireplace worked. The thermal mass stored heat properly. But the stone column against her exterior wall radiated heat in all directions, including outward through the wall into the frigid outside air. She was losing perhaps 20% of her heat to the exterior. Her wood consumption was 55 pounds daily compared to my 45 pounds with interior positioning. Clara came to me midwinter frustrated. Said Elias told me interior positioning mattered. I thought he was being perfectionist, but he was right. Every BTU that radiates outward is wasted. She couldn't afford to rebuild. Instead, she insulated her exterior wall heavily around the fireplace, packed earth and moss between the stone and the outer wall, reduced heat loss substantially. Not perfect, but acceptable. Robert Crawford's large firebox wasted heat up the chimney. His thermal mass worked storing heat and radiating overnight, but the storage efficiency was poor. Too much heat escaped up the chimney before the stone could absorb it. His consumption was 65 pounds daily, better than conventional but far from optimal. Crawford modified his firebox the following spring, narrowed the opening with additional stonework, created a smaller, more efficient burning chamber. The next winter, his consumption dropped to 47 pounds daily. 3 families learned through failure that Elias's design couldn't be modified or adapted. It worked completely or not at all. Every element was essential. The depth, the thickness, the position, the firebox size. All of it mattered. By winter 1885 to 86-8, families in the region had built proper Nordstrom-style fireplaces. All showed consistent performance. Uniform cabin heating. Overnight warmth from dead fires. Reduced wood consumption averaging 40 to 50 pounds daily in extreme cold. The 3 families who had built with shortcuts all rebuilt properly within 2 years. The evidence was too clear to ignore. Samuel fell silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. Then he focused on William again. 1898, 16 years after Elias built his original fireplace. I visited him one autumn afternoon. He was 60 years old by then. Still strong, still working his land. His cabin looked exactly as it had in 1882. Same stone column dominating the center, same earth floor, same small firebox below ground level. I asked him if he'd ever had to do major repairs. Elias shook his head. Cleaned the ash pit every spring, he said. Replaced firebox stones twice when they cracked from heat. Normal maintenance. But the thermal mass itself, the stones surround the foundation, no degradation. Stone doesn't wear out, it just holds heat. That's what it does. 1900. Elias's grandson was living in the cabin. Same fireplace, 18 years old, still functioning perfectly. Still heating the cabin through Montana winters with minimal wood consumption. Elias himself died in 1908, 72 years old. Lived long enough to see 23 families in the region rebuild using his thermal mass principles. Lived long enough to know that the knowledge his grandfather brought from Norway in 1840, the knowledge he carried to Montana in 1882, that knowledge had taken root and would survive. The 1887 cold snap came brutal and sudden. Temperatures dropping to 40 below for 2 weeks. Every family with conventional fireplaces struggled. 3 families in the broader valley region froze. Not in our immediate area, but close enough that we heard about it. 2 families abandoned their homesteads entirely, couldn't face another winter like that. Every family with thermal mass fireplaces came through fine, warm, safe, wood supplies intact. The 1893 winter was nearly as bad. Same result. Conventional fireplaces failed. Thermal mass fireplaces succeeded. The pattern was established. The knowledge was proven. 1914, I was 68 years old. A newspaper reporter from the territorial press came through interviewing old homesteaders about early Montana life. Asked me what was the worst winter I'd experienced. I told him about 1882 to 83. Told him I burned 90 pounds of wood daily and nearly lost my family to hypothermia. Told him about Elias Nordstrom and the fireplace everyone called backwards. Told him that fireplace heated 11 people through the worst cold I'd ever seen, burning 50 pounds of wood daily, less than I alone had consumed. The reporter asked what Elias understood that we didn't. I said, that fire produces heat, but stone stores it. We built fireplaces to burn wood. He built a fireplace to remember fire. The difference saved my life. The reporter published that interview. Within a year, I got letters from homesteaders across Montana and Wyoming asking for specifications, asking how to build thermal mass fireplaces. I copied pages from Elias's journal and sent them out. Spread the knowledge as widely as I could, because that's what knowledge is for. Not hoarding, spreading. making sure the next generation doesn't have to learn through suffering what we learned through freezing. Samuel's voice had weakened to a whisper. William leaned close. That journal in your lap, Samuel said. That's more valuable than this cabin, than this land, than anything I own. Because it contains knowledge that saves lives. Knowledge that turns stone into memory, that makes fire last through the night even after flames die. Promise me you'll keep it. Study it. When you build your own home, build it right. Don't take shortcuts. Don't think you can improve on principles that have worked for 3 generations across 2 continents. Just follow the specifications. Trust the knowledge, I promise, William said. Good. Now help me outside. I want to sit in the sun. Want to feel Montana warmth one more time. William helped his grandfather up, supported him as they walked slowly to the door. Outside, the June sun was bright and warm. They sat on the bench against the cabin wall, the stone column visible through the open door behind them. You know what the stone taught me, Samuel said after a long silence. Taught me that some things only work when you commit completely. Half measures fail. Shortcuts fail. You can't dig 4 feet instead of 6 and expect it to work. Can't use 12 inches of stone instead of 24. Can't put it on the exterior wall instead of the center. The design works whole or not at all. That's the lesson. In fireplaces, in life, in anything worth doing. Complete commitment or complete failure. No middle ground. William sat quietly beside his grandfather, watching the afternoon light move across the Montana landscape, understanding that he was receiving more than instructions for building a fireplace. He was receiving a philosophy of how to live, how to learn from those who came before, how to admit when you're wrong, how to accept knowledge even when it contradicts everything you thought you knew. 3 days later, Samuel Hartwell died peacefully in his sleep in the cabin he'd built beside the fireplace that had taught him the difference between knowledge and wisdom. William stayed for the funeral, helped settle his grandfather's affairs. And when he finally returned to Chicago, he carried the leather journal with him, its pages containing diagrams and measurements and 3 generations of accumulated understanding about how stone remembers what fire teaches. Years later in 1946, William Hartwell Jr., by then a successful structural engineer, designed a home for his retirement. Built it in Montana on land not far from his grandfather's old homestead. And in the center of that home, he built a fireplace, 6 feet deep, 2 feet of stone surrounding a small, efficient firebox, interior chimney, earth floor. Every specification exactly as Elias Nordstrom had specified in 1882, exactly as his grandfather Samuel had rebuilt in 1883. The fireplace heated William's home for 23 years, burned minimal wood, radiated warmth through cold Montana nights, kept its promises the way stone always does, the way fire never can. And when William's own grandson asked him why he'd built such an unusual fireplace, William opened an old leather journal and said, "Let me tell you about a Norwegian immigrant who understood what 3 generations of American builders had missed. Let me tell you about the winter that taught my grandfather that fire produces heat, but stone stores it, and the difference between the two is the difference between surviving and dying. The knowledge passed down, generation to generation, the way knowledge should, not lost, not forgotten, but carried forward by those who understood its value, who'd paid for it in frozen nights and exhausted children, and the terrible clarity that comes when everything you believe proves false, and the man you mocked becomes the man who saves your life. Stone remembers. Fire forgets. And men, if they're wise, learn which one to trust when winter comes and cold presses in, and survival depends on understanding that some knowledge is too valuable to lose, too hard-won to dismiss, too essential to ignore. That's what grandfather left behind, William had said to his own grandson decades later. Not a cabin, not land, but the understanding that pride kills and humility saves, and stone remembers what fire teaches long after the flames die. The leather journal survived, passed through 4 generations. Its pages yellowed, but its diagrams still clear. Its measurements still precise, its wisdom still relevant. Because physics doesn't change. Heat is heat. Stone is stone. Thermal mass stores energy proportional to mass and temperature increase. These principles were true in 1840 when Elias's grandfather built in Tromsø, were true in 1882 when Elias built in Montana, were true in 1924 when Samuel taught William, are true today. The fireplace everyone called backwards turned out to be the only one facing forward, toward survival, toward wisdom, toward the understanding that sometimes the thing that looks wrong is the only thing that works, and recognizing that truth requires setting aside pride and accepting knowledge wherever it comes from, even if it comes from a Norwegian immigrant everyone laughed at until the winter he saved 11 lives with nothing but stone and understanding and the patience to build correctly. Stone remembers. The lesson endures. And somewhere in Montana, Fireplace is built, according to century-old Norwegian specifications, still heat homes through winter nights, still prove that knowledge earned through hardship is knowledge worth keeping, worth sharing, worth passing down until it becomes not just information, but inheritance.